Welcome to the Learning Experience Ops Show, where we talk about making learning better that is future ready. I'm Jason Gorman. I'm the founder and CEO of Jackrabbit Learning Experience. In learning experience operations, storytelling is surprisingly practical. There is applicability to making learning experiences, right? Of course, stories make ideas stick for our learners. They make concepts easier to remember, more engaging, more usable, more fun. And for learning professionals, storytelling is also one of our best tools for communication and for influence. We are constantly in conversations. We are trying to create buy-in with the subject matter expert or, connect with the faculty person or sell our case to a leader or communicate across organizations or with a client. And very often we're in a place where we have to do those things, but without direct authority to just make things happen on our own. And so storytelling is a critical skill for all those reasons. And so I'm excited for today's conversation. Simon and I are business partners at a company called Story as a Service, which is focused on, you may have guessed by now, storytelling. And so this conversation that we're going to have, even though we talk many times a week, this is a good opportunity for us to record it. It's kind of a conversation from inside the work. So Simon Greenwald is the co-founder and chief executive officer of Story as a Service, a strategic communications consultancy that specializes in work with, for, and on behalf of higher education. Before starting Story As, Simon spent over 25 years as a leader at pioneering EdTech company 2U and in multiple executive roles at Northwestern University. At each stop, he has designed and enacted meaningful strategies and programs that stick. As a recovering scholar of literature and culture, he understands the power of story to move and compel individuals and groups, and is excited to bring the lessons of narrative force to leaders of mission-driven organizations. Welcome to the podcast, Simon.
Thank you for having me, Jason.
All right. Well, you ready to do some lightning round questions?
I think so.
Okay. So tell me your 30-second elevator pitch about.
Are you timing me? There's a timer on it.
Yes. No, I'm not.
30 seconds for me is I live in Evanston, Illinois, and I'm delighted to look out and see the sun shining on a snowy March morning, I guess early afternoon, and couldn't be happier being a business partner with Jason Gorman in the little startup that could Story as a Service.
That's
In
sweet.
terms
We should also mention James here too, probably, right?
absolutely. I didn't know if it would be germane to mention James Altman, the third stool of our incredibly strong three-legged stool that is
That's
story
right.
leadership. In terms of Story as a Service, the 30-second pitch, I would say that we do three things. Speaking of three stools, and people remember three things in storytelling. We do three things. We do strategic facilitation that starts with understanding and clarifying an organization's core story, your core story. Once we have that, it's a prerequisite for strategic planning. We can do a strategic plan with you. And the second thing is then teaching and telling that strategic plan and that organizational story to everyone who matters and matters most to you. And then the third leg of the stool is individual storytelling on behalf of the organization. So teaching faculty, students, staff, others, how to tell the most authentic, compelling stories on behalf of the mission, vision, values of the organization that you're serving.
And next question is, of all of the things that you do, what is the thing you love the most in your work?
Talking to people. Actually, the coolest part about my work, whether it was at university, whether it was in technology, whether it's what we're doing at Story as a Service, it's getting to meet really interesting people, doing really interesting things, making tremendous impact, whether that's in climate, in health, in humanities, literature, the arts. It's every day. It's a different conversation with some really interesting person doing a really interesting thing. And our work is about bringing that out into the world in original, creative, compelling ways.
To say, as a podcast host, that's like my dream answer. What's your favorite thing is talking. Great. We're doing the right thing now.
Hopefully that's weird thing that's one of your favorite things too.
Yes, it is. It is. Especially you, Simon.
Thank you.
Thinking about the future, what is one thing that you feel inspired about?
So I have a 17-year-old daughter who is applying to college. I'm getting into college, which is exciting. I'm inspired by her
Mhm.
and her creativity and originality. She is an amazing writer. She's a terrific storyteller. Weekend, she was sending her pieces out for publication to different journals. And I'm inspired by that and what she represents because there's lots and lots and lots of hers in the world, you have a couple too.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, let's look at the opposite side of that coin. It doesn't necessarily have to relate uh, to her, but also thinking about the future. What is one thing that has you feeling anxious?
Oh, a future.
It's the future aspect of the future.
Yeah, a future
Yeah,
aspect of the future.
that narrows it down.
When I worked at the university and I had staff. Now I don't have staff. I just have wonderful colleagues like you and partners. But I like to say, like, let's worry about the things that we know versus about the things that we don't know. There's infinite things that we don't know that we could be worried about, and it's natural to worry about them. I try to focus on sort of the most immediate things in front of us and deal with the kind of the things that lay right in front of us. So, there's of course existential dread about the world and what the future holds for sure, especially for our kids and the world that we are bequeathing. But I mostly am a relentless optimist, and so while I do have anxiety about the future, I generally approach it with a with a feeling and spirit of goodwill and hopefulness.
That's great. And just for anybody listening, I will say this for the public record. Simon, there are many, many days where I, I'm not a pessimist, but I'm not an optimist. I'm something in between. And there are a lot of days where I'm not being optimistic enough. So I do appreciate your optimism
No, and
greatly.
I will say you and Jane both, like, I do have a tendency from, like, when I used to play basketball, I could have the best shooting day of my life, but still remember, like, go to bed thinking about the 2 shots that I should have made and I didn't, right?
Yeah.
And it was the 10 that I did. So I also rely on you guys for that kind of affirmation and reminders too, because we all can kind of get into those little pockets or pits of potholes of despair.
I love a good love fest on a Monday. This is wonderful. Okay, last lightning round question. What's a skill, any skill, doesn't have to be work related, that you're trying to pick up right now?
Uh, Actually, last night my wife and I made steak tartare for the first time, and so I know that you are not a red meat eater, but we got a lovely sirloin from our wonderful butcher here, and we made steak tartare, which I had never done before, and so that was a skill, a thing that I wanted to cross off the list, and so I was able to do that. More broadly, I really need to learn how to play an F chord on guitar. And so that is a skill that I am hopeful to achieve in the coming months.
Lovely. All right. You ready to get into our other questions?
Yeah. Oh, there's more. Okay. Yeah. Yes.
There's All right, let's say you're hanging out with a friend who's kind of outside this world. Maybe they don't work in university. They do something else. And they ask you to just explain what you do. How do you explain what you do to somebody who isn't like a person who does the kinds of things that we do?
Yeah. Yeah. So, like, the thing that I try to focus on most is about communications are the most important thing for organizational health. Internal communications, and Jason, you actually helped create the story as a service tagline, your story from the inside out. Like, I think that sort of figuring your own core story out, like, what do you do? Why does it matter? How is it distinctive or optimally unique? And your DNA and my DNA is almost identical. We are still unique individuals. I believe the same thing for organizations. So, when I think about when I talk about our work with friends, it starts with this idea that in order for organizations to work, they need to have a healthy communications infrastructure. Good friend of
Hmm.
mine, good friend of mine is now the dean he was at Kellogg and now he's the dean at Wash U at their School of Business. He said at one point to me that internal communications in an organization are the least well understood, least well researched, most important part of organizational health. And I'll also say that Mike also told me when I went to work at 2U, I said, it's the work is relationship management and business development. And he said, that's sales. you should just go read Death of a Salesman again before you go take that job. And I was like, I know it's sales. I know it is. But I said, everything that we do at work, especially you talked about managing with influence, especially for learning design professionals, like everything that you do at a university, not even outside of the university, but within a university, it's all about persuasion. It's all about, so, and he was like, yeah, you're right. When I'm teaching my MBA students, like I'm selling my syllabus to them. I'm hoping they buy it. Right. And it's like, and so good stories in the classroom actually help your students. So anyway, in terms of like how I describe the work is like, it's about helping organizations figure out how to communicate more effectively internally in order to communicate more effectively externally.
That's terrific. And if, let's say, there's somebody who is a little closer to what it is that you do, is there anything else that you would add in addition to what you just said?
Yeah, I'd say, and in the intro, I think we certainly over-index on higher education, nearly everything that in higher education, but we do have some amazing clients that are not-for-profits in education and learning. Even we actually have a partner that's in education technology that's a for-profit benefit corp that are also involved in education and learning. So that's the broader envelope. What I'd say, like when I'm, if I'm talking to somebody who's a little bit closer to work, is that we all know that academics or even people who are just immersed in their own professional discipline and arena, they speak in a particular vocabulary, a jargon of that. Architects talk like architects, right? Lawyers talk like lawyers, mathematicians talk like mathematicians, so on and so forth. And oftentimes those folks, as extroverted and as compelling as they might be, they might need some need some help in translating their vocabulary into nouns and verbs that anyone can understand. That would make people say, oh, it would make things that'll help people remember the things that you're saying. And so if I'm, walking the halls at a university or I'm at an academic conference, I'm talking about what we do. A lot of it is about giving examples of work that we've done to translate academies or professional jargon into nouns and verbs that people can understand and putting them into some sort of original content that is compelling.
So actually, maybe just to make this that much more concrete, is there a quick example you could give of a project that has been done that really just where you did the things that you just described, just to say like this was sort of the case and the problem they had, and this is how we.
Yeah, absolutely. There was there was a project with Princeton University. You've heard of it. It was actually a very cool project. They were taking 3 different units and creating a new business unit within the Office for Research. So it's called Office of Innovation. And it was bringing in their commercialization groups and other kinds of outreach and engagement groups, and 3 parts of the org that were not sort of connected, strongly connected before, or formally so, organizationally so. And so our work was to come in and work with them to create figure out what are their things that make them unique. Like, what do they do? How are these 3 things together different than the 3 things apart? So what do they do? How does that matter? What kind of impact are you trying to have? It's just so interesting. Princeton, in our conversations with them, in our listening sessions, they're talking about being in some ways risk averse as a university. They're kind of perfectionist, and Princeton doesn't make mistakes, which is obvious, right? Except when you're entrepreneurial or you need to be innovative in an office of innovation, you have to be willing to fail fast, learn, move. And so how do you imbue a culture with that? How do you, in the world of translation of research, so much of that is in the sciences and engineering. And at Princeton, which focuses really holistically on learning and really cares about humanities and social sciences, to their credit, their chief innovation officer wanted to try to bring in the whole university. And so we actually used the word translation as a real key driver for the message for the office, because translation works for scientists. Like, we want to translate bench to bedside, right? Or translate our lab work to something commercial, right? But it also means something to the humanists. It also means something. It brought in the whole campus. And so there was
Yeah.
just a real concentration on vocabulary and really focusing in on words. And then what we ended up doing with them, and it's super cool. You can actually see it in their materials now. We actually created a specific visual language to go along with the vocabulary that we developed with them that forces one to innovate while they are interacting with the office. And I won't go into it more, but it was a pretty wonderful original visual language that we did to complement the story work that we did, the narrative work that we did. And I'll give a shout out to our strategic partner, Marco Kindler von Noblock at Multiple Studio, with whom we did that project. They're a Madrid-based studio. That was, I think, their first US-based project. And
Mhm.
now we're to be doing a lot more with them.
Wonderful. What you just described is really kind of taking this, it's kind of a complex, novel challenge, communication challenge, right? That Princeton had, but a lot of our clients have. And there's a distillation. It's a very common thing in the work. It's just taking something that is hard to communicate or difficult, or somebody, if you are really just immersed in your technical background, it's hard to come up with the words that somebody maybe on the street, or who's looking at funding you but doesn't really understand what you do, is going to respond to. Um, and so this is my next question is about some of your past experiences. So I mentioned in my intro that, you were an instructor at Northwestern, you were in leadership at Northwestern, worked at 2U. And I'm kind of curious, what were some of the skills that you learned and you were using in these past parts of your career that you feel like are really critical to doing the work well now?
Yeah. It's funny running my own little company with you. I actually feel more like an academic
Mm.
now than I ever felt like when I was actually an academic or an academic administrator, in the sense that, and this is an overgeneralization, but generalizations are generally true. The, I get to research things. I get to learn about lots of things. Like when I was working on my PhD and studying, and I was a full time student. Well, it was obviously when you're working on a dissertation, you're trying to learn a whole lot about a little thing, but you're still learning a whole lot, right? And you're constantly trying to figure out other perspectives on that thing that you're trying to unpack and understand. And then so there's like a level of like research and just the intensiveness of study that I have to do now in our work. Like when I'm going to interview a faculty member or dig into an organization to figure out what their core story is, you have to learn, you have to listen, right? So there was a piece of that is part of this work. When we facilitate our workshops, both the organizational sort of strategy workshops, but also the storytelling for impact workshops that we've developed. We can talk more about those in a bit. But that facilitation, I'm like in front of a classroom again. And I feel like the way that I used to teach
Yeah.
was, I feel like I'm being a bit didactic right now. I tried not to lecture. I tried to just ask lots of questions. I knew I had 3 to 5 things that I wanted to accomplish by the end of that hour and a half session in my class. If I
Yeah.
could ask those questions, elicit draw out the answers. It's a lot of what we do in this work now, but also just frankly, working in higher education for as long as I have, both as a student, teacher, an academic administrator, working out from the outside. When I worked at 2U, I was in partner relationships, account management, and it was just all about sort of understanding how things work and how to get
Mhm.
things done, right? And understanding that on that side of the looking glass in higher ed, it's a different thing, it's a different culture, and so really sort of understanding that and bringing that into the work now, it helps our partners, it helps our clients, because
Mhm.
we've seen a lot, and it can help them solve the problems that they're having on their campus, even if we've never set foot on that campus before,
Right.
virtually or otherwise. We know, like, there's 7 jokes in the world. There's probably only 6 academic administrative problems that need to get solved, and we've solved them in some way. So
Storytelling right now has a bit of a buzz. It feels like um, we've been doing the work that we do, so maybe it's because of that. I'm just seeing it more in the world. I suppose that's possible, but I do feel like I hear other people just talking about storytelling as a thing. And I'm curious. So, if let's say there's a faculty member somewhere that we haven't met who's listening to this, or somebody else in higher ed leadership is listening to this right now, what would you want them to know? What would you say to them about why storytelling actually matters in this moment that we're in right now?
Yeah. So, I mean, I studied the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union is built on a story, right? So it's a utopian vision of how society can or could work, right? And there is a story being told that then, by politicians, that then was lived through that culture. We see it in our politics here, and the way that narrative is being used to shape the truth or not, right? So I think we can understand from a kind of a macro perspective the power of narrative. And from a micro perspective, it's just important to understand that stories are not just a nice thing to have, right? We have to recognize that every single thing we do before we just hopped on. How was your weekend? Well, on Saturday I did this. He told a story. On Sunday I was kind of a lump. I just hung around. That's still a story, right? You still, the level, every single thing we do as humans is to tell stories to each other. When we are at leisure, we watch stories, we watch shows, we watch movies. Every song, a pop song, is a story, right? So we're narrative processors. We hunger for them. We want them. We feed on them. And so for the faculty member, just to understand, what your data is important, or or the language that you use in your literary journal is important. And I would never tell you not to speak in that language or use that kind of data, but understanding that there's ways for what you're doing to stick with the people that need to understand it, need to
Mm,
hear it, right? If you can use some of the things that in our leisure make stories so compelling, if we can
yeah.
recognize that and then bring it into our workplace just a little bit, it's almost like a superpower. All
Mhm.
of a sudden, you started to do certain CrossFit exercises, and you're like, "Holy crap! I can actually like run that mile faster than I thought I could, even though I didn't think I was doing the exercises for that." Right? Storytelling is kind of like that. There's certain exercises that you can do. You can get better at it, and it helps you, and then it helps your organization just, I think, thrive in ways that are unexpected, even that and but definitely help promote the success of what you're trying to achieve.
I can think of a couple examples, but I'll ask you the question. What's what is an example of a client that had this exact thing that you're talking about, right? Where there's just a lot of data, they're doing the research, they have a way of talking about what they do academically, but they needed to kind of bring it down. And you don't, if you can talk in specifics, that's great. If not, we can talk in generalities. But I'm kind of curious for you to unpack a little bit this process of going from the very intellectual, the very data driven, the very technical into the story driven. What is the story driven version of the technical and the data driven?
Yeah, we've had a lot of wonderful clients, and I gave an example of Princeton before, and uh, maybe to show the diversity of the kinds of places that we work with. Princeton is well, obviously it's an N of one, but even universities that it represents, elite private universities or college and universities, that's a lot of the work that we do is with research
Mhm.
university and research units, institute centers and such within those universities. But we also do a lot of work with universities that don't have a massive research enterprise. Some, but that are R2s or that are purely sort of tuition driven, largely online or even exclusively online, doing workforce acceleration, workforce development, largely for working populations, military veteran populations. Like,
Mhm.
in many ways, that's the mainstream of higher education, but Princeton isn't the mainstream of higher education. And it's a total pleasure working across that whole continuum. In terms of a project, I'll talk about one of our best and awesomest clients, which is Excelsior University, which is just coincidentally headquartered in my hometown of Albany, New York. I've known their president, David Scable, a real long time, back to when I was a PhD student at Northwestern, and he was a young associate dean at Northwestern, I want to say. Um, David has done lots of wonderful things and has been president of Excelsior for about 5 years, took it from being a college to a university. Um, and he's one of the more entrepreneurial, innovative leaders in higher education out there right now. And he has a vision and a strategy uh, for how Excelsior can operate within this incredibly volatile, precarious higher education environment we're in, where there's tons of university closures and tons of and a demographic cliff and all of the things that if you read the Chronicle, you hear every day. Anyway, they have a strategy that's called the Constellation Strategy, which is a strategy to create a new kind of university system, not a system like the Cal system or the SUNY system or the Wisconsin system, where there's a school here and a school there and a school there. And if you're a student at one of them, you don't really have access to the things at the others. And he's imagining, like, what if you could create a university system that could do that? But it wasn't just within a state, it was within the whole country. And what if that constellation involved nonprofit organization or as employers, or you have like internship opportunities? It's a different way of thinking. A lot of what we did with Excelsior was to help sort of really understand what the strategy is and also then how to execute on it. And then to help the legacy employees at Excelsior understand that the work of the future was really the work of the present, right? And understanding that the three things that Excelsior is going to do as a large planet in this constellation or star in the constellation, are the things that Excelsior has been doing for over 50 years. And for people who were there a long time to understand, this is just an extension of what we do, not a totally new thing that's going to make us like have to do everything differently. Might have to do some things differently, but that work, it's a little different. I mean, I think I realized I answered the question a little differently than how you asked it, but it was about taking a concept that was scary for the staff in a lot of ways, this future facing concept, and realizing actually it's actually just an extension of what we have been doing rather than some sort of weird pivot. And I like to say, think of it this way. Your core story of an organization is like a Shakespeare play, right? When Shakespeare wrote the play and it was performed 300 years ago, it's different than it's performed now. Right now, it might be a Netflix series, right? It's a different form, it's a different shape, but it's still the same play. And I think organizations, as they evolve, as they do strategy and think about reimagining themselves, they should be thinking of themselves as a Shakespeare play. I think it's a useful way of taking something that has a past, a legacy that has to be respected in the present in order to kind of push forward into the future.
Well, I appreciate what you said about working with lots of different kinds of colleges and universities. They really do vary a lot. And I think one of the things I really was excited to talk about in this conversation, because you are having so many conversations with so many different leaders and so many kinds of institutions of higher ed right now, I'm kind of curious if you could talk a little bit about the kind of zeitgeist. What are people in higher ed? It's a challenging time for higher ed for a lot of reasons. A lot of funding has gone away. There's been a lot of pressure in other places. There's, the enrollments, the foreign student enrollment is challenged. It's a lot. But what are people feeling in higher ed right now? How would you describe what you?
Yeah. Well, there's a great Chekhov quote. I think it's a Chekhov quote. I attribute it to him. It might not be right, but we can check. Any moron can handle a crisis. It takes a genius to handle everyday life. Like what I'm seeing across, whether it's the 3-car garage university or the 1-car garage university, last year, well, I should start. Higher ed has been under duress for a really long time. It's actually been, my former boss, Andrew Wachtell, dissertation advisor, former dean, who's like, he would say that higher ed is the last unreconstructed industry in the world. Like it's still waiting for its disruption. I think we're there. Like I think it is officially being disrupted now by, the pandemic gave it a good whack, and now AI is now on its chest, right? I think so. But if you've been in this and you read the Chronicle every day, like as I have for the last 25 years, there's always some existential thing, right? It's worser now. right? I mean, as I just said that, I then it'd be so, yeah, or yeah. I just I did a bunch of PhD students that I did a session of WTF are you going to do with a PhD? Said the job market was always horrible. Now it's horribler, right? It is. Yeah, let's just recognize that higher ed has been under duress a really long time.
Yeah.
Things have not been great for a long time. It hasn't been disrupted though in quite the way that it is right now. And then there's that external disruption of politics. 2025 was the worst year higher ed ever had, I think, in terms of just like the federal assault on the institution, right? And I think everyone were quite rightly shocked and awed by the awfulness of it. I think what I have seen in the zeitgeist is what happens. We are hardwired to get back to work in the fall, right? We are hardwired to sharpen our pencils and let's get to work. And what I sort of felt like happened and what I see happening still is things suck. And again, they suck harder now than they sucked in a long time. But but leaders, and not just leaders, the faculty, the students, the administrators, you got to get the work done. Still have to teach students, right? We still have to get the research done. We have to figure out how to do it, right? How do we do it in ways that aren't dismissive of the zeitgeist, right? How do we do it in ways that acknowledge the things that we care about, the values that we want to continue to promote? As you know, we just did this big project, a Sloan-funded project with the Ivy Plus on diversity, equity, inclusion. We did that in the last year.
Yeah.
It's been hard, but there was still a desire to do the work. And I think that's the thing that I am impressed by is the people. Again, we said it in my introduction, we love to work with mission-driven organizations, right? These organizations that are recognized, whether it's teaching students or doing groundbreaking research or both, right? How do we get that done? How do we continue to get it done in the most responsible ways and the most efficacious ways? I think that's where we can help. But that's what's been gratifying, edifying to see is a willingness to do the work, even though things still suck.
So just pivoting off of that answer, because that's great. If you could give, I don't know, 3 to 5 good, solid, concrete pieces of advice for somebody in higher ed who thinks that storytelling could help them in some aspect of their work, right? We've already named probably half a dozen different ways that storytelling could be a benefit. What are some kind of universal ideas, concrete things that people might try to do and apply in their work?
Well, it's a great question too, because I said the third leg of the stool for what Story as a Service does is teach individuals how to tell stories on behalf of an organization. So a lot of what we talked about is that organizational narrative, and that's the mainstream of what we do for sure. I'd say it's 80% of what we do. Although we're looking to do more of the in-person workshops, especially for learning designers. I want to give a shout out to our partner Mario Juarez, who helped develop this Storytelling for Impact course that we've taken to try and apply to learning professionals, higher education, diversity in higher education. So shout out to Mario for his partnership and also general awesomeness. 3 things to remember from storytelling is that people remember 3 things, right? Maybe 4, maybe 5, but 3. What are when you're telling a story, really try to be concise, right? Consider your audience. One of my favorite lines, you've heard me say it a million times, is that stakeholders hold stakes. Try to understand what they're holding. Because if you understand what they're holding, you'll be able to get your thing across to them more effectively. And as I often say, sometimes that story needs to get told in a white paper, and sometimes it needs to get told on a trucker hat, right? Same story, different message depending on the stakeholder or your audience. So 3 things, and consider your audience, remember your audience, and again that goes for individual storytelling as well as organizational. And then remember that people remember details, right? Again, back to my my academic background. Stalin, I think, said, and it's horrible, but 5 million deaths is a statistic. One death is a tragedy. Remember that, right? When you're telling stories about data, like one really well told anecdote with specific details of seeing people, pain, place, right? That's going to make people remember the thing that you're trying to get them to remember. So those would be the three things.
Thank you. All right. We just have a couple questions left. Right. So here we go. You have a lot of interests. So I know you. We've covered a tiny little fraction of the things that you are involved with, get up to, are interested in. You're holding a baseball
Season
currently, right? Like,
couldn't be more excited.
that's one of the things is baseball. But anyway, what's something that you have borrowed from an unusual place that has nothing to do with storytelling, nothing to do with higher ed, nothing to do with academia, that is important in your work? So an idea from some other part of your experience in the world that you use in your work.
I was going to talk about Russian literature, but then that's still kind of my work, so I'm not going to do that. I just told a story to actually that David Scaball I mentioned, the president of Excelsior. I just had breakfast with him on Friday. He coincidentally lives here in Evanston's, Skokie, Evanston, and commutes to Albany. So it's just a thing. So we're having breakfast, and it was this incredibly gusty day, and it had a bad turbulence, and he was able to land. He was a little delayed, but it was fine. As long as you take off and land, it's okay. But I told him a story. We were talking about just work and workplace turbulence, right? And I said, actually, my father-in-law was a Pan Am pilot. And for a long time, his email was A747DRVR at Hotmail or something, whatever it was. And Yahoo, maybe. And if that's still there, probably shouldn't throw shade on Yahoo. But anyway, I remember having a conversation that is like, if you close your eyes and you think about a Pan Am pilot, like that's my father-in-law, like 6'3", slick back gray hair, blue eyes, broad shoulders, like quiet, earnest. Right. He was a Navy pilot. He had his hook from landing on aircraft carriers. He had his hook from the Navy in Vietnam hanging over their garage. Like he's like the opposite. My father, who is, a wonderful, crazy Jewish artist from New York. It's like the complete opposite person. But years and years and years ago, Kurt told me that my father-in-law told me there's three kinds of turbulence. There's mild, moderate, and severe. Right? And that mild turbulence can even be like you pulling on against your seatbelt a little bit during the flight. Even when the pilot says, flight attendants in your jump seats, that's still mild most of the time. He said in all the years of flying, there was moderate turbulence, maybe a couple hundred times. But again, this is in 30 years of flying, right? And that's like things are a little bit like feel like, oh, you're like really holding on to you. And then like, and severe is like things are flying around the cabin. And that like happened like less than 10 times or something like that in all the years of flying. So the message is like when you're feeling it, it feels mild. I mean, it feels horrible. It feels severe. It's probably 99% of the time it's still mild. I don't want to say that it's not all. Sometimes things can be awful, right? But I think about this at work, right? When I like it, or the socio-cultural, political moment we're in right now. Sometimes, because does it feel like it's severe turbulence, or is it might feel like that, but it might actually just be mild. We just need to figure out how to ride it out, right? Again, I don't mean to say that crises don't happen and things aren't severe. Certainly in the world right now, it's severe, but in terms of our work, in terms of how we work with our clients, our partners, so much of it is just like, how do we understand the context, really appreciate it, be calm, right? And recognize that we're going to figure out a way through it, right? So I think that's a relevant example since I literally just had that conversation a couple days ago. It was top of mind for me. So I could have done a baseball one though. Our next podcast, I'll come up with a good baseball.
We'll do a baseball one.
Good.
We should do a whole baseball. I don't know anything about baseball, but we can do a whole one.
Everybody needs to play their position. That's a good one for an organization.
There you go.
Everybody needs to play their position. First base needs to understand what the catcher does. Catcher needs to understand what the center fielder does. and everybody needs to play the position for the team to be successful and to communicate. Okay.
I love that. What? We get two. We get a bonus.
A twofer.
A bonus one. So, okay, last question. There's always a question. Last one is always from a previous guest.
Yeah.
This one comes from Louis Najim, and he has assured me that I'm not butchering his name when I say it, but I'm not sure. Louis, I hope that was okay. And here it is. What is something that you believe about learning design that most people would disagree with?
So you're the learning design expert. I'm a learning design fellow traveler, but I've been a fan of Jackrabbit as long as Story as a Service, even since before Story as a Service was a thing. The thing that it's what I would disagree with. What's the question?
Yeah. What is something that most people believe that you would disagree with?
Most people would believe I would disagree with many things, but about learning design in particular, I think, and we've talked a lot about this, the disruption of AI, it is going to disrupt, but it is not going to fully upend the industry. And I think, again, I just having watched the Academy Awards last night and the beauty of art and things that are made and the things that are made that are memorable in learning design, yes. Is AI going to disrupt? It is for sure going to disrupt. But for learning designers, there's going to be I think many would say that the industry is going to be it's going to go away even. And I would say absolutely not, that there's way too much humanity that's necessary in it for good learning, real, authentic learning to happen. And so that's why I would say to the learning designers listening in, keep at it.
At the very top of this conversation, you were described as an optimist, and now we are ending on a very optimistic note. So I would say
I wasn't BSing, man.
This has really worked out. Simon, thank you so much for coming on and doing this. This is really fun.
I appreciate you, man.